Hello, Audre Lorde Project and beloved community. I'm Sister Dr. Alexis Pauline Gumbs, and I'm so honored to be part of your celebration of Audre Lorde's 87th birthday. Yes! And I'm recording this on February 18th, the actual high holy day, and really excited to be part of this weekend's festivities. So I want to start with a poem that I wrote for Audre Lorde in November, actually on the day of her passing. And for me, it's really about the power of the word, because Audre Lorde wrote in her journal that she was going to go out like a meteor, and she actually passed away many years past when the doctors predicted at the peak of a meteor shower. So I went and watched that same meteor shower this past November in honor of Audre Lorde. And I had a vision. I wrote a poem. The poem is called Arieto for Audre Lorde. And for those who don't know, Arieto is the name of a Taino dance of healing that continues right now as part of Cuban Spiritismo practice. It's called the cordon in contemporary times, and it's a dance that's comprised of a group of people holding hands. And the healing, blessing component of the dance ceremony harnesses the power of the meteors and the storm and counterclockwise movement as a healing force. This is the epigraph. I am going to write fire until it comes out of my ears, my eyes, my nose holes, everywhere, until it's every breath I breathe. I'm gonna go out like a fucking meteor. Audre Lorde. You take my hands in your hands. Spin me around the universe. Round 1, the world is full of stars. Round 2, I realize the stars are coming out our eyes, our ears, noses, mouths. There is a chord. Sometimes you call it language. Sometimes you call it gut. You string your shells and stones through it, necklaced by salt. A meteor is a world on fire, a star out of place, light rushing through the medium of your face. So that's the poem. And there are so many things that I could say in response to the beautiful prompt I was given about Audre Lorde's strategies and tactics. What would her advice be for our movement at this time? But I would say that there's so much more. There's so much more than 10 minutes that I could say, and I'm in the midst of writing a new biography of Audre Lorde called The Eternal Life of Audre Lorde, Biography as Ceremony. And there's just more than I can even fit in the book, let alone in these 10 minutes. But I will say that this idea of moving counterclockwise, the way that the galaxy moves, depending on your perspective, and the way that a storm moves, is important. And one of the things that I'm trying to do, and that I affirm you all for doing, is this counterclockwise turn of really looking back and gathering the resources that we have, really looking to our chosen ancestors like Audre Lorde as important models for this time. So I want to affirm that counterclockwise approach to movement that you already are living into. And then I'll also say, I've written elsewhere with the Mother Ourselves Manifesta about how mothering is actually the strategic practice and the idea that we can learn to mother ourselves is what Audre Lorde really outlines in my favorite essay by her, Eye to Eye, Black Women, Hatred, and Anger, which she just goes into it. And it's as relevant right now as it has ever been, because it really looks at how people with shared oppressions want so much from each other. We want so much from each other, but we also play out the coping strategies that we have developed to survive that oppression on each other in a more intense way than we play it out on anyone else. So I recommend reading that essay. I recommend Googling and checking out the kind of distillation of the points of the Mother Ourselves Manifesto that I created. But today, it's actually all about the poetry. And I would say that Audre Lorde's tactical advice for our movements right now comes from the specificity that she practiced as a poet. I'm learning more and more that her poetry was really the core of her life, and though often what gets quoted are parts of her prose, often titles of her essays and speeches, without delving deeper into the context, there is a way that for Audre Lorde, poetry was the core of her political practice because it was where she actually touched the exact place where the political became personal and the personal became political. And so what I've learned from Audre Lorde's practice of poetry is that in our movements, we get to be as deep and as messy and as visionary as we are. Most of Audre Lorde's poetry came out of her dreams and her practice of writing her dreams down when she woke up. She required her students to keep dream journals. And part of what that was about was that the things that scared Audre Lorde the most, her nightmares themselves, became this place where she could look at the difference between the story, the dominant story about what was going on, even within activist movements, and what was there under the surface for her. And if she could bring what was under the surface into a space where it could become collective and accessible to us through her poetry, then we could actually come much closer to living our actual dreams, our deepest desires that are operating on multiple levels of our consciousness. So there's a non-linear approach that Audre Lorde is offering through her poetry that really values our dreams, really values the aspect of what we're experiencing that we don't know how to explain yet. And so I would say that it's imperative for our communities to create spaces to have those conversations, even if it includes actually sharing our nightmares with each other in a safe space where we can hear each other. But more importantly, it is about going beyond the rhetoric, right? Audre Lorde's poem that I feel like is the most explicitly relevant for the work of the Audre Lorde Project is called Power. And it's about how power functions, about how power works, but it's specifically describing a nightmare that she has because she feels complicit in an act of police violence and a police officer who was a student at John Jay College of Criminal Justice where she taught, who murdered an unarmed Black child, Clifford Glover. And this poem comes out of her nightmare, but where she starts is the difference between poetry and rhetoric is being willing to kill ourselves instead of our children. That's the advice, y'all. So we can be really good at the rhetoric. It's very interesting that the aspect of Audre Lorde's work that has been most used by our movements is her rhetoric. But she's saying that as long as we stay in that rhetorical space, we're actually deferring for the future a transformation that needs to happen now. So I just want to encourage us to be poetic with each other, to be non-linear with each other, to actually create spaces to describe the indescribable, not the grant application quotable, not even always the fit on a placard or sign articulation, but that more complicated, messier aspect where we really can touch our dreams aspirationally, the dreams that we want to make come true for our communities, which are very connected to the nightmare processing of our experience that we also are having and that Audre Lorde had. I would say that the other thing that Audre Lorde's poetry teaches, and that the repeated practice of poetry teaches me as well, is that there's so much value in a small change. And in poetry, what Audre Lorde is doing with language, what all of us as poets are doing with language, is we are putting words into a particular relationship with each other. We're showing something through where the line breaks. Audre Lorde liked to use, towards the end of her poetry career, breaks inside of the line. And the space between us, the space between what we say and what we do, the breaks and pauses that allow us to see a different possible relationship between the same two words in the same two order, that is something that I also feel like Audre Lorde is teaching us to bring into our movements. What are the small shifts that we can make? How do we look closely at the shifts in our relationships between each other? How do we make space for actual breaks and rests that allow what we do not to be in a constant cadence of action and reaction? I think there's a poetic approach to the urgency of our organizing at this time that is definitely supported by Audre Lorde's work and practice. And of course, I could talk about this so much more, but there's a whole beautiful celebration of events that's going to continue. I'm just so honored to be a part of this. I am so thrilled every time I hear Audre Lorde's name in association with the brave and powerful work of Audre Lorde Project. And may the celebration continue. May we dance in this circle, counterclockwise, spiral, forever. Thank you.